So today I'm going to talk about the Event201 pandemic exercise video, and this video was released on November 4th, 2019, about more than a month before the first cases of COVID-19 were tested and recorded. And I just want to point out how odd the dates is and how, how odd the information being noted in this video is. So I just want to take a look at that.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care, many died.
And how odd that is, those are almost the same symptoms that have been seen in COVID-19. It's like they knew this shit would happen.
Experts agree, unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic.
And look at that, it's actually happening right now.
An outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
The mission of the Pandemic Emergency Board is to provide recommendations to deal with the major global challenges arising in response to an unfolding pandemic. The board is comprised of highly experienced leaders from business, public health, and civil society.
We could be looking at double the number of cases in 1 week and 16 times as many in a month if we are not able to stop the spread. That would be on the order of 500,000 cases, and it would continue to rise exponentially. In 3 months, we could be approaching 10 million cases.
We're at the start.
Hey look, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that means Bill Gates' ass was in it. He knew about this shit that was gonna happen.
Of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic.
Probably funded this exercise.
And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and
cool.
governments working together.
We have known about caps-like viruses in animals and people for decades, but have not been successful at developing a licensed vaccine. And sure, there are new technologies that may help, but it's going to be difficult. I am not optimistic about having a vaccine in time to be relevant during this pandemic.
So the policy crisis in question for this board in this meeting is this: how should governments, business, and international organizations allocate and distribute pandemic antivirals and medical supplies to the people who need them most?
What we've seen work very well in the HIV field is in fact procurement through the Global Fund. So having a centralized mechanism, so financially able to procure on behalf of affected countries will be critical. I think the second thing is it's going to be very important that for the business sector, for manufacturers of antivirals, that we have clarity around what the need is and where the need is and who are making the decisions.
I think that given that the countries most affected are those that are low and middle income countries with unequal access to technology, to finances, the UN has a worldwide footprint, universally recognized, and universal membership.
A global stockpile would certainly help ensure more rational and strategic allocation, but the reality is that we don't have the logistics capability, even within the UN, to bring that together in one place and run it. So this is where I think a collaboration between the international organizations like the World Health Organization and the private sector, which runs these supply chains for many purposes every day, understand where the supplies are, make smart decisions about how to allocate them to the people who need them in the places that need them the most, and then work with the industry to move those supplies from where they are today to where they need to be.
Just to underscore the point that cooperation among supply chain providers or businesses that have huge supply chains can add a lot of efficiency to the whole process.
The question is, can you, through this international mechanism, really promote commitments to doing this as quickly as possible and give people a sense that actually if they contribute more, that they will have a better chance of protecting their own populations and their country's security and health.
So to be completely clear, most of this production would already be committed in contracts.
Yes.
It is almost unheard of that people are producing product without having a forward commitment for the consumption of that product. So the first thing that needs to be done, because this is not something that the countries currently control, unless countries are going to bring about emergency situations and co-opt an existing supply chain.
I think it's not likely. I agree that countries are not going to buy countermeasure to put into a global supply without retaining a large portion of it for themselves.
Public health agencies have issued travel advisories, while some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas. As a result, the travel sector is taking a huge hit. Travel bookings are down 45% and many flights have been canceled. A ripple effect is racing through the service sector. Governments that rely on travel and tourism as a large part of their economies are being hit particularly hard.
How should national leaders, businesses, and international organizations balance the risk of worsening disease that would be caused by the continued movement of people around the world against the risks of profound economic consequence of travel and trade bans?
If there's some sense that there's a UN institution that can do all of this, then I worry we're suffering from a delusional disorder on the power of the UN. It's really important to get those industries and their trade associations and an efficient leadership established, which is decentralized, but has a collective responsibility and accountability. And that needs to be supported by the public leadership.
What is essential, what is non-essential travel, we have to clarify this. Otherwise, if we go down to 20% bookings over a long period, the company will run down. That's a fact.
You know, there's a whole complex set of issues in a highly interdependent world on supply chains that are just in time. We need to think about how much flex there is in that just-in-time supply chain system and make sure it keeps running. I think it's going to take specificity, and it's going to take knowledge that only the private sector has. The UN can play an important coordinating facilitation role, but the companies know where those commodities are, where they move, how to move them, and that's where a type of public-private collaboration that we have not generally had in these crises needs to be put together pretty quickly.
We are not out of money yet. But the fact is we are trending in a dangerous direction and something needs to change.
So the policy question for this board now is how should financial resources be prioritized? Are there nodes that we cannot allow to fail? What is your sense of priorities? We don't have money to pay for all of these urgent problems.
So at the moment, we want the funds, right? You need the money. So where's the money? So government kind of supplies some money. A lot of, private sectors, some are sitting here, you have some money. But now you need a really coordinated, centralized effort.
Hotels will be experiencing, crippling losses doing that. And we know that the hotel business in itself makes up 5% of the GDP.
Governments need to be willing to do things that are out of their historical perspective, or for the most part, it's really a war footing that we need to be on.
We shouldn't underestimate the power of entrepreneurship. We need to escalate that, whether it's through the government's helping with tax breaks or subsidies of that nature to increase manufacturing of those types of products.
Well, look at that. But the problem with that is that large corporations get tax breaks. And, I don't see anything wrong with tax breaks for small companies, but large corporations get that shit. And they get to expand and push all the small businesses out of the economic market. That's the problem.
It can happen quickly. A Marshall-type plan.
But the
I don't mean to say that exactly, but a Marshall plan that can go into effect can stimulate change very quickly.
Got that shit. They don't even need it. That's the problem.
Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
How much control of information should there be? And by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from
That's what it's doing right now. They're censoring everybody.
I think it's
Even
very
my
important
ass got
that
locked
we
down on
make sure
Twitter.
that there is concise communication with all healthcare
For
facilities
what? I
where
didn't
these
even say
patients are
anything
being treated
inappropriate, and I
so
got
that there
locked down
isn't
on
mass
Twitter.
panic.
We're at a moment where the social
That's
media
how fucking foul
platforms
these
have
people
to
are.
step forward and recognize the
They want to
moment to
censor
assert that
people,
they're a
that's why.
technology platform and not a broadcaster is
They want to.
over.
They want to.
They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate
Keep
information
government
and
bootlicker
partnering with the
information, but
scientific and health
then
communities
the
to
information that questions authority,
counterweight,
they
if not
censor that
flood the
shit.
zone
That's
of
what they
accurate
do.
information, because to put the genie back in the bottle of the misinformation and disinformation is nigh impossible.
Misinformation.
One thing we haven't spoken about,
Bullshit.
and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news.
I personally do not believe
That's
that
basically
trying to shut
censorship.
things down in terms of information
They're
is
trying to
either
sugarcoat that shit.
practical or desirable. And we do have, I think, a couple of strategies that are available to us, one of which is the flood strategy, second of which is relying and informing and equipping trusted sources of information with the facts so they can then pass that on. But we also need to actually think about a technological answer to this.
The outcome of the CAPS pandemic in Event201 was catastrophic. 65 million people died in the first 18 months. The outbreak was small at first and initially seemed controllable, but then it started spreading in densely crowded and impoverished neighborhoods of megacities. From that point on, the spread of the disease was explosive. Within 6 months, cases were occurring in nearly every country. The global economy was in a free fall. The GDP down 11%. Stock markets around the world plummeted between 20 and 40% and headed into a downward cycle of fear and low expectation. Businesses were not borrowing, banks were not lending. Everyone was just hoping to hunker down and weather the storm. Economists say the
Which
economic
obviously did not
turmoil
work.
caused by such a pandemic will last for years,
Locking down
perhaps a
does not
decade.
work.
The societal impacts, the loss of faith in government, the distrust of news, and the breakdown of social cohesion could last even longer. We have to ask, did this need to be so bad? Are there things we
No.
could have done in the 5 to
If y'all
10
didn't
years
do this shit
leading
and
up
didn't
to the
release the virus
pandemic
on the whole
that
fucking
would have
world, this
lessened
wouldn't
the
happen.
catastrophic consequences? We believe the answer is yes. So, are we as a global community now finally ready to do the hard work needed to prepare for the next pandemic?
Yeah, basically that's how crooked the government is. That's how fucked up they are. That's what they do. This is the truth of the government. The government ain't your friend. Don't be a status. Don't be a government bootlicker. When you're so devoted to the government and their people, this is what happens. This is what happens when people are so blinded by personality and not policy. This is why people are so comfortable where they are, even though there are a lot of shady things going behind closed doors. This is what happens when you are a bootlicker. I'm done with this video.